Psalm 61. Hear my cry, O God, attend unto my prayer. From the end of the earth will I cry unto thee. When my heart is overwhelmed, lead me to the rock that is higher than I. For thou hast been a shelter for me and a strong tower from the enemy. I will abide in thy tabernacle forever. I will trust in the covert of thy wings, Selah. For thou, O God, hast heard my vows. Thou hast given me the heritage of those that fear thy name. Thou wilt prolong the king's life and his years as many generations. He shall abide before God forever. O prepare mercy and truth, which may preserve him. So will I sing praise unto thy name forever, that I may daily perform my vows. Our primary verse of focus this morning will be found in verse number 2, the last part of that. When my heart is overwhelmed, lead me to the rock that is higher than I. Title of this morning's message, Higher Ground. Higher Ground. Let's pray. Father, you know what needs to be done. You know each heart here. You know that each need in each heart, it's all different. There's no way for us to humanly meet those needs. But Lord, you could meet every one of those needs. You could meet each of us right where we're at and take us where we need to go, even in this service. And we ask that your blessed Spirit would do the work necessary here. We put our complete faith in his ability to work in our hearts and teach us the person of the Lord Jesus. We ask that you would do these things in the precious name of our Savior. Amen. It has been a difficult week. I cannot expound any farther on it than that, but it has been for me a very difficult week. However, I do need to qualify that statement. I live what they would call an idyllic life. The reality is few people on the planet have ever lived as easy a life as what I live. 99.99% of the people on the planet would trade places with their problems for my problems any day of the week. 99.99% of the people on the planet would trade even over. The fact is, I personally would not trade my life for anyone that I know or have ever heard about. I would not trade my life. But with all that said, I had a difficult week. So what is this difficulty of mine? Well, you have to understand. If a guy's been in a serious car wreck, he's hauled in with the ambulance, he's got a punctured lung and a broken leg. You know that man may have cuts all over his face and glass embedded into his skin, and they don't even care about that. It's immaterial at the time, right? It's not important. You take a man who's in full health, and he hits his finger with a hammer, he's going to shed a few tears over that. You see, it's all relative. Does that make sense to you? Difficulties are all relative. And I had a difficult week. Compared to most, my difficulties are minor, maybe even non-existent. But I lay awake at 2 o'clock on Saturday morning after this week with my heart overwhelmed. I think most of you know what I'm talking about. They may or may not be big problems, but they are your problems. In our passage here, David is having a hard day. We're not for sure when David wrote these words, probably a little later on, but we don't know for sure when these thoughts first came into his mind. When my heart is overwhelmed, lead me to the rock that is higher than I. It could have been when he was a shepherd boy, out in that field at night, lonely as all get out, and his heart is overwhelmed with loneliness. He could have had these thoughts first when he takes the food to his brothers. His dad tells him to take it. And when he gets there, his brothers give him all kinds of grief. And his heart is overwhelmed with their criticisms. It may have been when he was bending down and picking up 5 smooth stones out of the brook, with a giant bearing down on him that was kind of overwhelming. It could have been one of the many times that he found himself running for his life from Saul. Very possibly it was when he came back from Ziklag with him and all of his followers to find that all of their families and all of their belongings had been stolen and carried off. Maybe it was when he sat on the throne as a king and the pressures of the job just overwhelmed him. It might have been when Nathan stuck his finger in his face and said, "Thou art the man." And he's faced with the sin that he is committed with Bathsheba. It may have been when David, trying to do good, was moving the Ark of the Covenant to Jerusalem, but they hadn't followed God's instructions. And here Uzzah lays dead next to the cart. It could have been David's heart was overwhelmed at that moment. It could have been when David chose to number the people. And then he had to choose the punishment for Israel for that. He had to choose whether they'd have 7 years of famine, or 3 months of defeat at the hands of their enemies, or 3 days pestilence. David chooses the 3 days, and the next thing you know, his heart is overwhelmed because 70,000 people are dead from that choice. Maybe it was when his right-hand man Joab murders Abner when he's under David's basic flag of truce. Quite possibly it was when David was running for his own life again from his own son, Absalom. Any one of these times, maybe all of these times, and hundreds of times that are not recorded for us in Scripture, David cries out, "When my heart is overwhelmed, lead me to the rock that is higher than I." My friend, overwhelmed hearts are not just for kings or for famous people. Everybody here knows what it means to have their heart overwhelmed. True, we don't have the same problems, but we do have the same feelings. Our hearts are overwhelmed by loneliness, or by grief, or by problems, or by circumstances. Our hearts are overwhelmed by loss, or by sin, or by uncertainty, or by the situation that we are facing. And like David, our hearts at times get overwhelmed. Now you may be sitting here saying, "Well, that's not me. My heart is not overwhelmed." Well, let me tell you, you better keep Psalm 61 handy, because if it's not now, it will be soon. As I lay awake in bed at 2 o'clock on Saturday morning, my heart was overwhelmed. You say, "Was that the discovery of the ages or something? Are we all supposed to sit out here in the auditorium and have a pity party for you?" Get in line, pal. There's a long line of people waiting on pity parties. So get in line. Get to the back of the line, by the way, if that's what you're expecting. We all know what it means to have our hearts overwhelmed. We don't need a pity party. What we need are answers. And David gives us the answer. When my heart is overwhelmed, lead me to the rock that is higher than I. Let's break that answer of David's down just a little bit here. Lead me is what he says. Lead me to the rock that is higher than I. Lead me. The word lead is a great word. In fact, if you actually understand the word for what it is one of the words full of more comfort probably than almost any word in the English language. That word lead is a very comforting word. Lead me. Well, what does that word imply? What does the word lead imply? Okay, let's take you back, some torture time. Let's take you back to the days of torture, your high school English class. How many were English lovers? A few English lovers here. The rest of us were in the torture chamber. There is no heart of mercy in the life of an English teacher in high school. And she says those dreaded words, "We are going to diagram sentences." And you said, "Have mercy on us." And there is no mercy in the heart of an English teacher. And you are going to diagram a sentence. Now, all you teachers' pets out there, you just keep your answers to yourself, because the rest of us need to think a little bit here. You're going to diagram the sentence, and here's the sentence you're going to diagram. Lead me to the rock. Oh boy, so you draw your line. You remember that? You draw your line across. And then you think. Lead, that's a verb. You put that in the verb spot, which is the second spot over. Lead, me. Well, that's a pronoun, and lead is an action verb. That means that me has to be the direct object. How many of you knew that?
Did you have to look this up?
I did not. Actually, English was one of my better subjects. To is a preposition. To the rock is a prepositional phrase, and that goes down below. And you've got this whole thing laid out, except for panic sets through your heart. Because a sentence has to have a subject. And you've used up all the words already. So what is the subject of the sentence? Don't blurt it out, you English majors. What is the subject of the sentence? Lead me to the rock. You've already used up all the words. Where's the subject? How many have the answer?
I didn't have it then.
Yeah. What is the answer? It is an understood you. You write in the first, you write Y-O-U, and you put it in brackets. That means it's not there, but it is there. There is great help in that, my friends, because there is an understood you in the sentence. You are not alone. When your heart is overwhelmed, David says, lead me. What he's saying is, we're not alone in this deal. God is right there with you. There's a lot of help in that. You are not all by yourself. You are not alone. When you are overwhelmed, their Lord is there. What else does it imply? The word lead implies that the person leading knows how to get you where he's taking you. That's what is implied. When you say the word lead, it implies that the person leading knows how to get you where you're going. This happens all the time. Well, let's just say I was standing out in the parking lot here and somebody pulled in. And they said, hey, we're trying to find Powers Cemetery. And I say, man, I don't know where that's at. I've never heard of that before, but I'm leaving here so you can follow me. Can you imagine the reaction on people's faces? Now, suppose I said to them, oh, I know where Powers is. You know, it just so happens I'm going right by there. I'll get in my car. And so I get in my car, and I pull up behind him. I say, go ahead, I'll follow you. You know, these people say, man, there's something wrong with this pastor. And the whole congregation says, we've known that for years. You see, leading implies that the person who's going to go ahead knows where he's going. And that's what's implied here. Do you know God knows how to get you to where you're supposed to be? Where are you supposed to be, by the way? Lead me to the rock. He's leading you to himself. He knows exactly how to get you to himself. And David cries out, lead me. He's implying God is there. And he's bringing me to himself. He knows how to get me there. This is very, very comforting. Lead me to the rock, which is higher than I. The word implies that he goes before. Hold on a second, I skipped a page in my notes. I thought. Yes, I was trying to skip that part. Leading implies that he goes before. This is embarrassing to admit, but my life is always that way, and I share it openly. But this is the truth, and I'm hoping that some of you are in the same category with me. I am by nature, a very shy person. I am by nature someone who doesn't like to go to new places. I don't like to do new things. I'm by nature a very shy person. So sometimes, sometimes you have embarrassing situations you've got to go into, or difficult situations, or uncertain situations you have to go to. I hate to admit this, but it is the truth, so I will admit it. Sometimes when we're going to these situations, we get there, and we're getting ready to walk in, and I live by the motto, women and children first. I hold the door, not so much to be a gentleman, but that allows me to be the last one in. You let the kids or the wife go through the door first into this difficult situation, into this new situation. Anybody know what I'm talking about here? Now, I have noticed that Carol does the same thing, and I've also noticed that she's on to me. Because I'll go one of these numbers, and she goes, I'm not going in there first. There's something comforting to having someone go in ahead of you, to be someone that be kind of that buffer between you and whatever you're going to face, right? And the word lead implies that. You don't lead from behind. The Lord goes before you. David says, I'm overwhelmed. And he says, lead me to the rock. Go before me in the way that I've got to go. Break the way. It implies the fact that he's with you. He knows where he's going and how to get you there. He's going before you. It also implies that you're going to get where you need to arrive. It'll ensure your arrival. Leading often involves taking someone by the hand and ensuring them that they get there. I think about this all the time, but most of you are familiar with this church property. It's a very extensive property the Lord has blessed us with here. We've got 11 or 13 acres, I can't remember which. There are 7 buildings on this property. Very extensive property. On the far edge over there, we have a shop building full of woodworking tools. If we brought onto this property a person who had no idea about the property here, they had no clue, and they were blind. If we took them and put them in the shop building over there, and we said to that person, I need you to end up in the baptistry. Would that even be possible for them to find their way? To wander out of a building that's several hundred yards from here, to try to find a building they have no clue about, which building you end up. Can you imagine what you think if you got into the tunnel? Like, what is this? You could end up in the back garages back there. You could end up in the academy building. You could wander in and out of buildings. There's doors everywhere. How long would it take for a person to get from the shop building who was blind into the baptistry right behind us here? And the answer to that is, who knows? They may end up in Art's house for all we know. There would be no way to, it'd be almost an impossibility. But do you know what? We could go down to the nursery right now. There's probably some 3-year-olds in that nursery right there who could go over to that shop room and take that person by the hand and have them in that baptistry in less than a minute and a half. They would lead them there. And what they could never do on their own could be done almost instantaneously by a little child. And David says, lead me. I can't get there on my own. I can't find you by myself. My heart is overwhelmed. Lead me. Ensure the fact that I get where I'm supposed to go, which is to the rock. Take me by the hand and get me there. Lead me to the rock that is higher than I. lead me is such a great word full of comfort that we need to live in that word. Lead me to the rock that is higher than I. We want to think about the phrase for a moment, higher than I. When your heart is overwhelmed, it cries out, there's got to be something higher than me. There's got to be something more than my intellect. There's got to be something more than my strength in this situation. The answer has got to have something more than my ability. There's got to be something more than my savvy, something more than my scheming. If your brains and your brawn were enough, your heart wouldn't be overwhelmed. You'd be able to see the end of it and say, this is what we're going to do, and your heart would not be overwhelmed. But when your heart cries out, there's got to be something bigger and better and smarter than me to fix this situation. My heart is overwhelmed, and I can't get there from here. Your heart is overwhelmed because all the paths that you can conceive lead to a dead end. I learned my electrical skills from the School of Hard Knocks. Maybe that should be the School of Hard Shocks. I started wiring without really any instruction when I was in the 7th grade, messing with 110 power. I have been shocked more than my fair share of times. Over the years, I worked with that, and we got a youth pastor here, a music pastor, who was really into doing musicals with the choir, and he needed lighting and so forth for the thing. And so we started, Johnny Weaver and I spent more time in the attic back then than we spent in the pews, I think. We were wiring these lights for the musicals, and so I learned a lot about wiring, trying to wire for these musicals. As things progressed, we needed a panel. This was before the days of economical, theatrical stage lighting, and everything had to be done heavy duty with the parts that we had. And so we needed something special. So I sat down with a pencil and a piece of paper, and I designed a circuit to a schematic that would do this lighting for us. After I got it all said and done, I started working through the thing, thinking through it, and I realized that when you put this switch and that switch together, it dead shorts, okay, meaning that it doesn't do anything and it will actually blow the breaker, okay? It's how you get shocked. It will blow the breaker, okay? It was a dead short. So I showed this schematic to a guy who was supposed to have a degree in robotics. And he says, oh, that's fine, it'll work. But I already knew. I have been through the School of Hard Shocks. And I can tell you, this does not work. It will not work. My brain was enough to design something that I knew wouldn't work, but I couldn't figure out how to make it work. Do you understand? I could find out that my solution to the problem is a failure, but I could not come up with the answer. And this is how most of our life is. This is why our heart gets overwhelmed. We look at our situation, we take all the pieces together, we put it together, and we chart it all out, and it says, boom, failure. It's not going to work. So we reconfigure it, and we put the plan together, and we run it out to its end, and we say, that's going to fail too. And so we put it together again, and we run it out, and that's going to fail too. And our heart gets overwhelmed because everything that we do ends with failure, and we know it. This is not going to work. And David cries out, there's got to be something higher than me. He doesn't say just lead me to a rock. He says lead me to a rock that's higher than me, because there's got to be something more than what I've got going on here to solve my problems. I was talking to a kid at Meyer Hall on Thursday night. He's a 15-year-old kid. He's been there 3 times. His mom he says, this is my last, he came out and talked. He said, this is my last chance. My mom's not going to give me any more chances after this. His girlfriend is pregnant with his son. He says, I got to get things changed around here. I said, I got to get this thing going. I can't keep going this way. I got to change here. I got to do something. I got to change I'm going to turn over a new leaf is basically how the older people would say this. I'm going to start fresh here and go after this thing. What'd I tell him? I'll tell you what I told him. You're not smart enough to run your own life. That's what I told him. I said, I'm 51 years old. I've got a family. I've got an easy life. It doesn't have a lot of the complications that yours has. And you've got a very complicated situation here. I don't have those complications. And I'm telling you right now, son, I'm not smart enough to run my own life. There's got to be something higher than you. There's got to be a rock higher than you that can make this thing happen. And you've got to get to him. David cries out, I can't get there from here. I got to have something more than myself. Lead me to the rock that is higher than I. Lead me to the rock. The rock is an interesting word here. We might debate what David means, but he tells us in verse number 3, for thou hast been a shelter for me and a strong tower from the enemy. Thou hast been a shelter for me and a strong tower. He says, this rock, you are the rock, and that you are to me a shelter and a strong tower. A shelter is something you need in time of trouble. You need something unmovable. That's what you need in a time of trouble. You need something unmovable. And David says, I'm in trouble here, and I've got to have something solid. I need a shelter. I think I told you this, but when we built our house in '93, our neighbors built right next door to us. Only we built a house on a foundation. They brought in mobile homes. Their houses went up a lot faster than mine did. They just pulled theirs in, and the next day they're basically done. And I was out there for months on end building. However, in our area, we get some pretty good high winds, and this is tornado. Calm down, Adam. It's okay. Adam hates tornadoes. We do get a little high wind around here, and we do get a few tornadoes every now and then. And so it happened one night that the wind was blowing. It was a pretty wild storm. And a knock comes into our door, and guess what? All the neighbors were in our basement that night. Why? Because their mobile homes were not very secure. And so we actually ended up with a standing agreement with them that if it ever was storming and I wasn't home, they were just to kick our back door in and go in, and we'd deal with the door later, be safe in the storm. It's okay, because you've got to have a foundation. The reason our house was safe is because it was built on a solid foundation that wasn't going to move. And this is what David says. My heart is overwhelmed. I'm going to get taken away by the flood here. This wind is just going to take me right down the road, and I got to have something solid. So lead me to the rock. I need something solid. Lead me to yourself. He says, you are my rock. You are the shelter. You're the strong tower. I don't know if you're a history buff or not, but the French, after World War II, built a fortification between them and Germany. Anybody know what it's called? Starts with an M. The Maginot Line, yes. Maybe the most expensive fortification ever built. Of course, during World War II, what did the Germans do? They flew over a parachute behind it and took it from behind, so it was the most worthless thing ever built, maybe the most expensive fortification ever built, but the Germans just went right over the top of it and took it from the rear, so it was actually no defense whatsoever. In our mind, fixed fortifications like that have no real value. But think about the Great Wall of China, and you're on a horse. How do you get your horse over a 15-foot wall? Okay, that's a pretty serious obstacle there, especially when it runs for hundreds of miles in any direction. And so Genghis Khan and those guys, when they run up to that, they go, okay, what are we doing? And now, okay, you're trying to get away through the wall or over the wall. Meanwhile, they're shooting you full of arrows. That's a bad thing. They're dropping rocks on your head and pouring boiling oil on you. Okay, that kind of limits the whole idea. It's a fortification. No, back in David's day, this is the thought process. They had a fixed fortification. It was where you went into and you were safe. Who's going to get you out of that? And David says, you are my rock. You are my fixed fortification where I am absolutely safe. Of course, David was an old war horse himself. And he knew that a strong tower should sit on high ground. My grandpa always said that you should always never build down in a hollow. Sound military strategy is always to go up high, to always take the high ground. In fact, if you know anything about history, this is why Lee was so successful for the South in the Civil War, why he was always so successful, because he always fought on ground of his own choosing. He would choose the high ground and make them come to him. The one time he did not do that, one little town called Gettysburg, which actually lost the war for the South. Lee is on top, the North was entrenched on top of the high ground all over Gettysburg. One of the generals, Lee's generals, who was told to attack that, he says, they don't even need guns for that. All they got to do is roll rocks down on us from that spot. Look, you always take the high ground. That's the safe spot. And David says, I don't want just any old fortification. Lead me to the rock that is on high ground. My grandpa always said, never build down in a hollow. Why not? Because you can't see anything from there. You can't get a good, clear view of what's going on. And when you go up into that high tower, you know what's going to happen? You're going to be able to see those things that are overwhelming you a lot more clearly. David says, get me into that strong tower where I am safe and secure and where I can be defended. One of the reasons we get overwhelmed is because we're down in that hollow. We cannot see clearly. We need to be up in that strong tower to get a clear view of our situation. But don't make a mistake here. David said, when my heart is overwhelmed, lead me to the rock that is higher than I. Now, do you believe that David's problems just all automatically disappeared? I don't think so. Do you think that all of the situations that he was involved in just miraculously cleared up and were gone and they didn't have to deal with them at all? I don't think so. So why do you want to get there? Because from that position of safety and strength, he could see clearly what he was dealing with and deal with them in the Lord's strength one piece at a time. So that his heart did not have to live overwhelmed, but he could take each piece as it comes in the strength of the Lord and deal with it one piece at a time. He said, lead me to the rock that is higher than I. I'm safe and secure, and from that position, I can see clearly the problems as they come. And one last thought. The word lead implies following. The word lead implies following. To get to that rock is going to take some movement on your part. You can't just say, I'm overwhelmed, I'm going to stay right where I'm at, and expect you to take care of everything. It implies movement on your part. Lead me to the rock that is higher than I. What does this mean? Have you ever tried to get someone to follow? Have you ever tried to lead someone who didn't want to follow you? This is such a difficult thing. When you're trying to lead and every time you turn back, they're smelling the roses along the way. You're trying to get someplace, you're trying to take them where they need to go, and they're dilly-dallying around, as my dad used to say. You're trying to get someplace, you're trying to get them, and they won't do or won't follow in your footsteps. To follow is going to take some movement on your part. What's that mean? What it means is you're going to have to let go of some things. You may have to let go of an attitude that you've got. You may have to let go of some bitterness that you've got. You may have to let go of some sin in your life. You may have to let go of some conclusion that you've come to. You may have to let go of some thinking process that's brought you here and you're secure in that. You may have to let go of some of those things in order to go to that high tower. Leading implies following. And there are some things that you must let go of in order to follow. I think you've probably all seen that. We use them here. They call them, the kids at the Meyer Hall call them the monkey track. It's a little booklet. It's got a monkey on the front of it. Have you guys seen that one? It tells a story about the monkey. You've probably all heard that. To catch a monkey, they would take a coconut and they'd tie it to a tree on a long stick. And they would cut a hole in this coconut and they would put an object in there that would just fall through that hole. And that monkey would stick his hand down inside there and grab hold of that object. And he won't let go of it. So then he can't get his hand out of the coconut, and so that's how they would catch them. He would get curious about that, and then they'd get his hand in there, and now since he won't let go of that object, he's now trapped by his own hand. This is so much of what happens to us. We get an idea, we get a sin, we get an attitude, we get a thought, and we've got it held on to. And when we could go to the high ground, we're trapped right there because we will not let go of that and allow the Lord to take us to that high ground. I'm telling you right now, you're going to have to let go of some things and follow if you're going to get to the high ground. At about 3 o'clock in the morning on Saturday morning, the Lord brought this verse to my mind. And I cried out, "Lead me to the rock that is higher than I." And so a few things had to get out. Okay, that idea is not worth anything, and that is not right, and that is not right either. Lead me to the rock that is higher than I. And I'm telling you right now, that strong tower is a very good place to be. Lead me to the rock that is higher than I. Higher ground. Father, we bless your name.